This is Drugfreedave Blender Studio. So this is my Blender setup, my studio backdrop setup that I use for Blender. All I do is open Blender and use this. It makes everything much easier. So if you've downloaded this from my Gumroad and it's a Blender file, it should say DFD Blender Studio .blend. So let's open Blender. Let's bring this up to the big screen. Okay, so this is what Blender looks like when you open it up. There's a little splash screen you can ignore. So you have a camera, you have a cube, and we have a light. But we don't need this default setup. So we'll just go to File, Open, Don't Save. So now in this window, you just go to wherever you downloaded my file. So I think I have mine in Downloads, and it's DFD Blender Studio right here. So we'll tap that, and we'll tap Open. So this is what you do first in Nomad before you bring whatever you want to render into Blender. So firstly, if you have mirrors, like let's say these little horn things are mirrors, just select the mirror, hit Validate, Join Children, and just rename this mirror to like horns. Rename it something that's make it easy to remember. So that's the first thing. Just go through and rename all. I don't even know what this is. What is this? Tail. And you want to go ahead and just make sure you do all of these mirrors. And the reason why I'm doing this, if things are like mirrored and things like that, they show up weirdly in Blender, and they're a bit hard to kind of keep track of everything. Also remember, if you have multiple things in a mirror, like in this mirror, I have the fingers and the arms, then a quick thing you can do is just clone the whole thing. And then, for example, these are the fingers, so I'll just delete it. And then on the one we cloned, I'll just delete the one that was on top. So now we just have two. This is the arm, and this should be the fingers. Yep. Validate, just rename this fingers. Okay, and this is the floor. Oh, and another thing, if you go to front, make sure you're in orthographic, turn on the grid, and see this red line. So that's going to be the exact ground in Blender. So that's why I line things up like this. I have this cylinder for the floor. I have it lined up so he's standing right on top of it, which is right at this red line. So when I bring it into Blender, it's going to be lined up with the Blender floor. Once you have it lined up, you don't really need this part. See, he's right on that red line. You don't need these cameras. You don't need these lights. So when I get to this point, I do Save As, and then I make sure to do New. And then I'll do like Red Dev, he's like a devil, Red Dev, and then Blender or something like that, BLND. So that way I have a new version saved where I've gotten rid of all that stuff. But if I wanted to open up the original version, I could just open the original version again. So it hasn't saved over the original. Okay, so, and the reason why I got rid of the lights and everything is because those come over into Blender, but you just want to add your own lights in Blender. You don't want to use all the camera stuff. It just makes it more confusing. Another thing that I do in Blender, one thing that you can do so you can see everything is go to this little sun, go to your environment, and just make the environment brighter if you have it lowered. And that's just so we can see. We don't need to be in post-process either, so we can turn that off. So we'll have better, so that our iPad and Nomad will run better. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm just going to save it again because now it's a bit more optimal. All right, so everything looks good. The next thing that I usually do is, so we have the body, we have the arms, and the tail. So if you think that all those are going to be the same color, tail, where's the body? Okay, so we have head, tail, and arms. Okay, so you can join those together. So now this will be the body. So just join all the parts that you want to be together. They're the same color or the same texture. You want to make sure that your scene vertices aren't super high. So if you have a really complex character, it might be worth it to go through and let's say the body and 308K, what I can do is go here and then I'll go to miscellaneous and then decimate. So this will bring down our vertices. So if I hit decimate, it cut that pretty much in half. But then I'll go in and look at it and just make sure that the quality is still looks good, because you can keep decimating and it'll get lower and lower, but eventually the quality will start to degrade and you don't really want that. So you can go through your different shapes like this. I might be able to just get rid of a little bit of, you know, just kind of cut it down. Like this is very high for just these shapes. So I'll decimate those. And they still look fine. Yeah, everything still looks pretty good. And the size is 264, so the size is lower. Okay, so now once you do that, your character is pretty much optimized. Just make sure that you have everything labeled, because this is the way that it'll show up when you export it. So go to File. Well, actually, let's just select all of these, but it doesn't really matter. We don't have anything else. Go to File, and you go to Export, GLTF, and all 7. And I usually just check all these. Export, GLTF, and I'm on a Mac system, so I can just airdrop to the computer. So I'll tap airdrop. If you're on some other system, you might have to just save it to files and then send it over however. But now this file will go over to the computer. Just a note, I'm using a MacBook Pro 2021, so I'm using a laptop with a trackpad. So some of my shortcuts might be a little bit different than yours are if you're using a PC or something like that. So I would just go online and look for shortcuts, because unfortunately Blender uses all shortcuts because it's keyboard and mouse or keyboard and trackpad. Okay, so usually what I do is close all my other programs, because everything else is just going to take up, RAM on the computer. So I usually just close everything else just to make my life a little bit easier. So this is the file that we're going to import in Blender. So we have Blender open. We go to File, Import, and then go to GLTF. And then you just find wherever you had the file at. So downloads, and this was the last file. It's 15.9 megabytes. This is the one we just imported. So I'll just tap import, and now our little character is here. And you can see on the right, all of these, everything is selected. So the first thing I do when I bring something in is I press with 2 fingers, I tap with 2 fingers. So I'm not sure what that is on a mouse, but you want these options to come up and you want to hit Shade Smooth. Sometimes something will look pixelated, so if that's the case, then just remember to smooth shade. The other thing that I like to do is hit this little plus here, and if you don't see it, sometimes you can open and close the window. Sometimes things get hidden, so that will add a new group or a new collection. So then I just double tap on that, and I'll name him Red Dev. So then I just select all of these, and I'll just bring them inside, long press, and just drop them inside. And if you want to select all of these, of course you can press 1 and then shift and click on all of those, or you can just go to the collection and click with 2 fingers, or it's probably right click on a mouse, but I'm not sure. And then you can just do select objects. So it will select all of the objects in there. Tap 1 like I'm on the iPad. Press number 1, and this will give you a frontal orthographic view of the front. You want to make sure everything in your character is selected. Press Control period. It'll bring this up. And if it isn't, obviously you just press the little move tool. And you might want to drag this down so that this middle part, so that this red arrow is right at the bottom. So once you drag that down, hit Control period again, and that will turn off. That's sort of like adjusting the pivot point. So basically I just adjusted the pivot point. I brought it down to the floor, and what that means is now that the pivot point is saved on the floor, I can take scale, and then I can resize him to whatever I want, and his feet and everything will stay on the floor. So let me hit 1 so I can see the orthographic view. So that's how I would just resize everything. And of course you don't have to do that. You can resize and then line it up to the floor, but this is just an easier way to do it so that you can move it around and resize it, and you don't have to constantly find out where the floor is. Another trick that I do a lot is I'm just tilting, so I'm looking underneath the model, and if it's not poking through, that means it's not quite touching the floor. So I just take that same tool, the move tool, and I just slightly move it down so that everything is touching the floor on the bottom. That way you know that in the render everything is touching the floor. Sometimes it's hard to tell. Okay, so now we have all of our pieces up here, and we have our little character already set in the scene. I had already recorded some things, so I'm going to jump back to that. So on the left here, we have a window. In the middle, we have a window. On the right, we have, this is the scene, so these are all the lights that I have. Cameras. These are my fruit pudgies, are these little guys here. We have the background. The background is the back and the floor. And dev is this little devil guy. So that's where everything is. That's similar to Nomad. Okay, so the reason why, if you're just starting out in Blender, when you open it, the layout is more like this. This is more like what it was when we were first opening the program. The reason why I don't use this is because when I model and do things, I like to be able to see what everything looks like and be able to maneuver around and just select things easier and see the cameras and everything. So what I do is I use the animation tab. So if you tap animation, and your configuration might be a little bit different, you can kind of, move and adjust like this. In this window on the left, I hit Z, and then I go up to render, and I hit render. So this is what the rendering will most likely look like. So what we're seeing here is a preview of the Cycles render. So Cycles is just like a render engine. So when you export in Nomad, there's no, you can't choose a specific render engine. It's just Nomad. That's how it renders. Blender is different. Blender has Eevee and it has Cycles. And for me, Cycles is the most realistic rendering process. So that's why I sculpt all my things in Nomad and bring them over to Blender, so I can adjust the lights, and also I can render in Cycles. It takes a long time to render, much longer than Nomad, but I find it worth it. So what we're seeing here is our viewport. So if you go over here, you see materials and things like that, which we'll get into, but all of these things here are like the tools that kind of, everything that you do over there will affect what you see here. It will affect all of this stuff. So right now, this is the back wall. This is the floor. So these are both materials, because right now the material is just kind of plain white. What I did with this is this material is more matte, because I don't want lights and things reflecting off of it, whereas the floor is a bit more reflective. It's a similar material, it's just more reflective. If you want to adjust any of those, like say you want to adjust the back wall, that's when you go to this little circle here, which is I use all the time. So just remember this little circle over here on the bottom. It's a little bit different in the other versions. I just uploaded last night, so I actually had to sort of relearn a lot of this stuff. Let's go to this this little red devil. Let's say we wanted to change the color. Here you can rename it. It might say, object. It'll probably say like just object or something random, and you can rename it here. And this will be your material. But it's not really a color. You see that it's black here. It's just the material that's imported from Nomad. So right now, the base color is just the color attribute, which just means it's just whatever was brought over from Nomad. So it'd be if I want to change the color, if I have any details or any paint that I did in Nomad, it would get rid of that. The only thing that you can change if you don't want to change the color, you can change like metallic. So you can see here, it's more metallic now. You can change the roughness. Right now it's glossy, but we'll change it to roughness, and now it's rough. So you can adjust all of that here. So if we actually want to change the color, what you can do is go to base color, and then you can go tap here and then just go to, go to RGB. And then it just turns a random color like this. And then you would just change the color here. And you can play around with all this. This is pretty easy. Obviously, you know how to mess with the color wheel. So that's how you change the color. Another way to do it, you can hit this minus. It will get rid of any material. And then you can hit plus, and then it starts with that default material. So then you can rename it, and then you can continue to color it. One thing to note when you're bringing your models into Blender, they will always, or at least in my case, everything becomes this like sort of shiny thing. So even though you may have something textured, rough, or super glossy in Blender, everything's always going to be this overall shiny color in Blender, unfortunately. It doesn't carry over that, roughness and different materials, unfortunately. Or at least I haven't figured out how to do that. Okay, so let's say you wanted to change the background. We know how to do this. It's always going to be this little circle, and here you can change the background. You can see it changes things a lot. Remember I told you the background is rough and this is glossy? Glossy is great because I love this reflection. It makes it really look like a floor. But if you want to match the color, just remember that you can take the color that you like, go to hex, and then just copy this, like, Command C or whatever, you can copy that. And then you can tap on the floor, and then you can just go to the color, and then you can paste it. So now we have the floor and the background. So I'm going to zoom out and just show you some of the things that I've set up for the studio. So you can see I only have one light here, which is this key light. Oh, and I have 3 lights. I have this light, which is lighting up the background. So I'll turn that off. And I have the key light. I can turn that off as well by just pressing here. And remember, this is so you can see the light. This is when you make a render, this is so it actually renders. So sometimes I'll start to render something and it won't look right, and it's because I forgot to do both of them. I find that really annoying. I wish I could just sync them, but I haven't figured out how to do that. I don't know if it's possible. So here are your lights, and obviously you can adjust them. You can play around with the different types of lights. What's great about Blender is you can use as many lights as, you can use a lot of lights. There's no like cap like Nomad is for, but you can use all the lights that you want. So you can just tap on the light, and then you can tap this. This toolbar is pretty self-explanatory. Rotate. This is the scale. This is kind of everything in one. One thing that I find extremely annoying, at least on my Mac, is if you're using everything all at once and you want to scale, unfortunately this white ring magically doesn't scale. Even though if you go here, it scales. If you go here, it's just like another rotate, which doesn't make any sense to me. But, so yeah, this is all pretty self-explanatory. You can move them in and out, up or down, and obviously you can see that it just changes the lighting for the scene. If you want to adjust the lights, anytime you selected a light, that little circle is replaced with this little light thing. So here you can change the color, the power, radius. So this is kind of like softness. If the radius is really big, it'll make it soft. But just be careful if the radius hits your character, it'll make this ugly. It won't have a soft fall off. Just be careful of that. So I'll make the radius lower, and then you just have a nice glow. And here's your other kind of lights. Spotlight. So you have all those, area light. So you have lots of different options for lights. That's kind of cool, actually. Let's turn this off. Let's turn on our key. And if you've done any of my tutorials, you know that like key is like sort of like the main light. You should have a basic understanding of all those things. But I have a bunch of other lights that I've added here. This makes a nice rim light. You can adjust it. That's coming from up here. But you can play around with that. You should understand that now. Okay, so we kind of went over lighting. Here's a light that's lighting up the background, and I kind of want you to be able to see. I'm going to go to Layout, and then I'm going to press Z and Rendered. Hopefully you can't hear the yelling in the background. Super loud neighbors. Okay, so here is, let's see if I can raise, and you can also change the resolution of the viewport, which I don't want to make too high because then my computer will start making noise. If you go to this camera here, this is a lot of the options. This top camera is a lot of the options for example, this is the viewport, which this is the viewport, what we're seeing. This is cycles. That's what I always use to render. This is EV, which is a little bit different. It just doesn't look as realistic as cycles. So I'll go back to cycles. And there's a ton of other stuff as well. I want to raise the viewport samples to maybe like 500, just so it's a little bit clearer. Okay, so here are my lights. And here's with the key off. So that's with the key off. This is the background light. So this is this light back here. And see, that's pointing at the background. So if you turn that off, then it's just darker. And if I press 1, so you can see the difference there. And soft front is right here. So this is just a soft light on the front. And you can turn that off, and then it's just dark. And you can do kind of every combination, and it will all look slightly different. Let's say we turn the key off, but you just want rim light. Then you have that rim light, which is nice. There's also another rim light that I made to kind of be shining in on the other side. So there's all these other lights that you can use. Let's turn the other lights back on. Okay. So we'll hit 1. Now we have the other lights on, plus these nice rim lights and things like that. So there's an endless amount of combinations. You can change the light colors. You can make the key a completely different color by going to that light bulb and just changing the color here. So this is like the key. So this is this light changing the color. One reason why I have this light up here, I'm just going to go back to normal. So one reason I have this light up here is because this light is what gives me a nice round reflection on the eyes. So if I was to open, if I open Toothless, it's that sort of light that gives me this nice reflection here. So that's why I have that light there. This is what we were trying to do in my last tutorial in Nomad. But it's easier because then you can also put a more square option as though it's like a window or something. So you can have all of these different lights, which of course this light is set up a little bit differently. I have a light to sort of assist with, the redness coming off of this. So there's so many options that you can do, so you can have fun with the lighting. Open Recent, and I'll go back to Blender Studio. All right, so we went over the materials and the lighting. So again, these are all your shapes and materials are together. If you want to move your character around, just make sure that you select all of the objects, whether you do it that way or you hit Shift and select them all, or you can just select them one by one and hit Shift, and then you can go through and select all of them. And that's how you would move them around using these tools. You can rotate, scale, and move them around. Okay, so the next thing is one other really important thing. You can see that my background is blurred because this is pretty much set up like a camera, and this is really complicated, but I'm going to go over it anyway because I know that you can do it. So if you want to adjust the blur, you know, when you like portrait mode is when you can, something in the front is in focus and the background's not focused. So you can set everything up. Sorry, I'm trying to get this situated. So you can set this up like a camera. Right now, this is my camera. So if you tap on this little black triangle, and if you right click or if you press with 2 fingers, set active camera, that's the camera that is going to render. So this is your camera. So once you press this, instead of that circle or the light bulb, it turns into a camera. And you can go down to depth of field. This distance is the distance that the camera is going to focus. So what that means is, like, firstly, you want to have your character where you want him according to your lights. So let's say, you know, we want him here, the lights work there. So then you can focus on his eyes. So let's do layout, and let's do Z and render. I just want to make this bigger so you can sort of see what I'm seeing. So once it's positioned, then you can do the focus distance. So obviously now it's out of focus. So you want to find the eyes. You want to focus on the eyes. So I'll zoom in really close, and sometimes I'll actually go to this camera and change it to Eevee, just because it's less taxing on the computer, and I'm able to just see better. So this is one of the times where I really use Eevee in this little camera. So I'm going to go back here to my little camera and go back to depth of field. So now you can sort of see how it's focusing. So you just find the eyes. There we go. So you're like, okay, the eyes are in focus. But as you can see, like, the eyes in focus, the arms in focus, but it's too narrow. So like only the tips of the eyes are in focus, but even like all this stuff is still out of focus. So we have to go back to my camera. So we'll go back to the camera. Press 0. So once you're back in the camera, we have our focus distance and now the f-stop. So if I raise the f-stop, you'll see that the plane in which our character is in focus is going to widen as the f-stop gets bigger. It's the same thing with a camera, a regular camera. So see, we moved it from 1.8 to 15.8, and all of these things are in focus. The background is still out of focus. So this is how you get those cool depth of field shots when, like, there's like something in the, whoops, oh my God, I think I'm inside the fruit. Let's say I move him up and I make him bigger. So that's how you get those cool shots when, like, something is out of focus in the front and focused in the middle, and then the background is out of focus. That's how you get those really cool shots using depth of field. So I'm going to go to my camera. So I'm going to just tap camera here and then make sure we're in the camera options. Blades, what that really means, this is a little more than you asked for, but blades is, you ever see a picture and it has Christmas lights in the background and there's those nice bokeh, like that's like the blurry balls of light because, you know, something is in focus in the foreground and the lights turn all these like nice blurry round blobs. So that's bokeh. Play around with all this stuff because it's pretty cool once you get the hang of it. Alternatively, you can turn depth of field off and everything will be in focus. So you might want to just start with that. And there's one more thing that I wanted to tell you about lighting situations is there's also a world lighting. See this little world? So this plays an important role as well. This color here is sort of the color of like the ambient environment. So let's say we changed this to, let's say we made it brighter and a little warm, or let's say very cold. So it's giving everything a cold sort of hue. So just pay attention to that. I usually leave mine on black, or like kind of like maybe a little bit above black, like a grayish. And then obviously this is the power of it too. So if it's really powerful, then, you know, but this is going to affect all your shadows and things like that. I think the default, you can right click or click with 2 fingers and you can reset to default value. So if you kind of get lost on something, you can reset it to the default value and it'll go back to whatever the default was. So this little output thing, This is also for rendering. So this will be your resolution. And I think there's some resolutions, there's some preset resolutions up here. I think I use, it might be this one. But anyway, so these are my resolutions. And this is all has to do with what you're going to export as a render. There's lots of things here, but this can all get very confusing. Most of the time you can sort of just leave them as is, and then slowly just play with them. But this is your resolution, which is important. Mine is very big because I always want, sometimes I have to crop in for videos and stuff like that, so that's why I export very big. It's slower, it takes longer, but it is what it is. Of course, this little camera above, this is render, so this is all these things. When you're rendering, this number is very important. You can try low and you can try pretty high. High is also very, like if this number is at 4,000, on my computer, this is going to take a long time, but it's going to look nicer. But usually 600 is pretty good. You can probably go lower. 600 might even be a lot, but that's what I usually do. If I wanted to export this, it might take like 20 minutes on my computer, just for this one scene that we're seeing over here. Obviously, noise threshold is 0.01. I just leave these as is because that's kind of like the denoise thing. Like when it's done rendering, it just makes it really clean, and so I just leave that where it is. Denoise, this change, you can untick this, and it it's the render thing. I was in the render. You want it to denoise in the viewport. So this is all the viewport. This is what we're seeing. If you want to hit denoise, it just kind of changes the look of it, but I don't really like that, so I just keep it off. And then there's all these very confusing stuff. Feel free to play around with it, but you don't really need to mess with all that now. We did go over some of the materials. So one thing that you're going to want to play around with is subsurface. Now, again, this subsurface has just changed recently, so it's a little tricky. And I think what I want to do, I'm going to hit 1 again. I think what I want to do is just delete. So go here and delete all these extra things. So I'm going to delete these guys. I guess we can leave those. I'll click on the background, hit X. If you're on this screen, you have to hit X. And you can delete all this stuff. Delete. Okay, so now let's move. So I'm just going to take this light. I think this is soft front. I'm going to move this light behind these little characters that I have down here. Remember, I was saying the reason why they have that sharp edge is because this radius is just very big. So again, you just go down to this little light bulb, and I'm going to bring down the radius a little bit. I'll move it back. And right now it's at 200. I'm going to make that one. I'm going to make it 500. So you just tap 500 here, and you can, it'll be brighter. Okay, so let's add a shape. So press Shift A, and then Mesh, and let's do Cube. And let's tap this tool here, so it's kind of like all encompassing. So we'll take this little box and we'll shrink it like this. Let's move it up, and let's shrink it a little bit more, like down. All right, and now let's press Command C and Command V. So we just made a copy of it, and then we'll just move it down. And I think you can right click and, can you copy and paste? You might have to do it over here. See, these cubes kind of ended up in Dev. So you might have to go here, and then you can right click and copy and paste as well. So we just wanted to make a copy. The top copy, let's make thinner, because with subsurface, it's all about like how thin something is, which shows how it makes the light go through it easier if it's thinner, obviously. So that's why we want to have 2 different levels. And actually, let's do it again. Command C, Command V. Bring this down, and let's actually just make this one a little thicker. So now we have a few options here. I'm going to move these little guys on the side They're just two pieces. So I'm just selecting them both and then just sliding them over to the side, because right now they're kind of in the way. Okay, so now we have this light behind them and we have these pieces. So if you want to do subsurface, maybe I'll make this brighter. I'm gonna change this to 2000. Okay. So now this light is 2000 coming from behind them, but you can't really see through them. So we click on the first box, the thinner one, and let's go back down to our materials. So let's just add a material. And let's tap here and rename it A. And let's name these B and C. So we'll add B, add C. Okay, so we have A, B, and C. So on A, if we go to the materials, here's the color and all that jazz, and we want to go down to subsurface. So if we expand subsurface, you have random walk, which is random, but you have weight and scale. So those are going to be really important. So you want to play around with weight and scale. So the weight is, I don't really know what it is, but it doesn't really seem to be doing much. Like you can tell, you can see the outline is changed a little bit. So that's the weight. So I'm going to bring the weight to like 0.4. But what's really important is the scale. So the scale, I think, has to do with how, like, the density of the object. So if I raise scale like this, then you see then the object is like kind of like a whitish kind of color. Oops. Or a reddish kind of color. It was white before. I think the more dense you make it, probably the darker the red is. Or maybe the whiter it is. But anyway, so now you can sort of see, you can see this subsurface scattering. And subsurface scattering is just light going into an object, and it's just scattering all over inside of that object. Okay, so for the next one, go down, we'll do subsurface, and let's put weight to all the way up, and let's put scale all the way up. So now you can see it's just like very bright white. Okay, so the thick one, let's see what happens if we change the color to blue. Maybe we'll make it metallic. And then we'll just go down and we'll do the subsurface at maybe like 0.5. And then we'll do the scale as well. We'll try to make it, let's do it all the way since that one is thicker. Okay, so you can sort of see that it kind of gets through the edges, but it doesn't get through the whole cube because it's still quite thick. So that's how you would do subsurface. I just kind of wanted to go through that because it's really confusing now that they've changed it around. So for example, these little pieces here, I'll go to subsurface, maybe change the weight and change the scale. And you should be able to see through it, which I can't really. Let's see if I move the light. It could be because it's white. Let's change the color a little bit. Let's see if it was green. And this radius thing, that just kind of affects, like, it kind of gives the subsurface different weight colors, like more blue or more yellow or more, you know, whatever colors you want. So that's what these are. It used to be a little bit easier to control the color of the subsurface because you could just do subsurface color, but I'm not really sure how to change it right now, so we'll both have to figure that out. IOR, if I turn this down, I thought that it would make it thinner. Let's bring the scale down. Yeah, so it's a little weird, but more experimentation needed. But at least you can see how to make things kind of see-through. And really quickly, there's also all these other things you can play around with. If you want something to be more clear, then that's transition. And if you raise that up, I think it's just get more clear. And now you can see the back edges. Specular has to do with like the reflections and things that hit it. Coat, I had to figure that out. And all these other ones I don't really mess with. Usually just subsurface. So that's just a quick and dirty on subsurface. Let me get rid of these cubes. Oops. Okay, so that's pretty much the overview of how you bring your characters in to Blender. Play around with the colors, play around with the lights. It's worth it to mess around with this stuff. Play this video again if you need to. Write me comments if there are things you can't figure out. I can try to work them out, but again, Blender is really confusing, so give yourself that time. But trust me, cycles rendering will just make your work look so much better. But you have to put the work in Nomad. You want to have everything set up. You want to have everything painted just like you want it in Nomad. Unless it's just plain. Like if it's something like this, and then you can just change the color and it doesn't matter. But if I was doing a character like this and I made like some paint things on it, then I just wouldn't be able to change the color. I could only change the metalness or the roughness and things like that. But it's worth it to play around with it and get used to Blender because it makes your work look really amazing. I'll open up something else that I worked. Oh, here's Donnie. Donnie is a big file. The file was like over 1 million, maybe like 2 million. Hit 1. But obviously he was all rendered out, or is all done in Nomad. Did all my coloring and everything in Nomad, all the details. But once you bring it into Cycles, if you did good work in Nomad, it will show in Cycles. Or in Blender. All of these details and everything I did in Nomad. The only thing that I did in Blender was, I think I adjusted the glass. And in order to do that, you just, like, let's grab all this purple. To make something glass, then you go down to the materials again, and you change the surface. So principled BSDF is the default, but you can change it to glass. And then it's glass. How weird is that? So that's how you change, different things. And there's different materials, and you can sort of play around with them, but normally I have everything on principled BSDF. Oh, I guess it got rid of the color. Imagine a Ninja Turtle with like a black. How cool is that? So I'll get rid of this material, add a material, and then change the color to black. I love it. It doesn't have all the details, and it might not have color variations that I added in originally, but yeah, you can still change the color at least if you want to. What I like to do is go here, check that it's Cycles, and check your max samples. Right now it's at 650. And you go to render up here, and you go to render image. So when you're rendering, it's kind of going to go into this window, and it's going to start rendering. So we go here, we hit render, image, and then it's going to start rendering. It's going to start rendering, so whatever the set camera is, that's what it's going to render. So this is why it's rendering like this. And as you can see, it just counts through all the samples. So sometimes they can take a very long time, and then eventually it will be done. Let me close this. So once your render is done, it'll just show you the information, and then make sure you hit image and save, and then save it as whatever you want. So So for example, if I wanted to save this image, I'll go to Image, Save, and we'll name it Black Donnie. And then you just save it, and it will save as Black Donnie. So it might take a long time, but it's worth it. All right, so I think that's it for this tutorial. Let me know if you have any questions. I will try to help you. But thanks for getting my Drugfreedave Blender Studio. Have fun with it. Use it as much as you want. Use it for whatever you want, because that's really how you learn. All right, keep drawing, keep sculpting. See you all in the next video. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to go more in depth, then definitely check out my Skillshare classes where I am a top teacher. I have about 50 classes, both Procreate and Nomad Sculpt. I also have a few classes on Udemy, so if you want to learn more, or you just like my style, you like the way I teach, you want to support me, those are some other places that you can do it. Thanks again, keep drawing, keep sculpting. I'll see you all in the next video.